So good morning, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting of the Harbor Place Transportation Work Group to order. Just to briefly go over the agenda, we're going to review with Andy and his team a revised option A to which will include the input we've had on circulation outside the building from between the time of our last meeting and this meeting from staff. That will take, I think, the preponderance of our meeting today, and it's my hope, just as one person, that we can reach some, at least some direction on where we'd like to go. And then Andy's going to begin just to kind of, at a very high level, review some, or just begin get a taste of some of the financial calculations and potential supplemental funding mechanisms. And then just at the, before public comment, Libby's going to speak to kind of the future of this group and kind of where the town's going and their planning for this new facility. Any questions or comments on the agenda? Hearing none, I will say it's accepted. Any announcements to come before us? You received the minutes from the April 24th meeting. Any comments or questions about that? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion to approve them. Made. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Those no. Thank you. Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, no, also I'd like to welcome the gentleman on my right, Nat Knoll, who at probably 9:30 last night, he was asked to join our group. 11? Oh my God. And welcome, and you know, I'll be happy to meet with you afterwards and kind of bring you up to date on where we are or at any time. So Andy, go ahead.
So when we met last time here, just to recap, we talked about where we had been, where we had started, and what we had accomplished thus far. And we had gotten ourselves to a point where, after some discussion, we got into a place where we had an option A that we seemed to have general consensus on. And this option would offer up to 270 spaces on 3 supported levels here. It included about 5,800 square feet of ancillary space for different uses, such as waiting areas, lobbies, bike rentals, etc. There was some discussion when we last met about what this might look like, and we were lucky enough to pick up an intern this semester who's fairly gifted in SketchUp. So I asked him to take at least a first run at what this might look like in terms of concept. This is far from a finished product, but to give folks an idea of mass, size, orientation here, this is assuming a brick facade that is congruent with the buildings that are already on site. You can see the vehicle entry here. This is Candle right here. This is the street called Steeple Street. Here's your vehicle entry and exit right here, and this is all of your access to the ancillary spaces that are along the Candle Street frontage going around the corner to Steeple. I also asked him to do a close-up. We modeled it off of another structure in Staunton, Virginia that was suggested to us as a good example of the kind of design standard we were going to looking at. This is basically what it might look like if you're standing at the corner of Candle and Steeple looking toward the core of downtown here. When we last met, we had also initially talked about how this might integrate with the NRTA, and we had floated an initial concept which had sparked a meeting, some collaboration to talk about different ways that this facility might mate with the NRTA operations across the street at Greenhound and along Washington. We met with Paula, we met with Mike, went down to the site, took a look at how operations exist currently. We're fully briefed on the challenges associated with NRTA. It's sometimes in high volume. And came away with 3 concepts. And the first concept we were asked to look at is one of the challenges we've had since day one, and it's the question we've struggled with, is this primarily an intermodal center? Is this a parking structure that's mated with an intermodal center? Is it a parking structure? And what we're really looking to do is go with a true intermodal center mated with the additional parking capacity that downtown is looking for. The first example we looked at was just purely an intermodal center. And basically what we said is, what happens if we take the NRTA operations that are happening on the Greenhouse site right now and along Washington Street, and we bring them over to our project site. So we're still working within the same 234-foot long, 124-foot wide footprint. And we've taken Greenhouse, the pad, and an additional three parking spaces for bus operations that are currently stationed on Washington, and we put them basically on this corner. We took a look at what we could do with this corner and realized that really all we can do is make this an approach site, because we've got to be able to get the buses up onto this and then back out on Kendall or across the way to Washington. So this, which is called bus pad, is essentially access roadway in order to get to all of the bus stops that are staged right here. It leaves us with a development pad of about 35 by 55 here, which could be any number of things. Could be parkland, could be other ancillary buildings. We hadn't necessarily dedicated what that might be. We just wanted to be able to call it out on the plan. And then it leaves the far end of the site, which is running about 90 by 124 for parking. And when you talk about what that looks like, it's 48 parking spaces tandem parked. That's what we can fit on the site right now. So that's option one. Option two.
That's basically without a parking garage.
Hmm?
That's without a parking garage.
Can't fit a parking garage on that site and get the intermodal site.
Put it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So option two is to retain the parking and try and mate some of the NRTA operations that are happening on Washington Street with the structure. This assumes, and we checked, there is adequate queuing distance here in order to bring in 3 different bus stops back to back. This is assuming a 34-foot bus length per bus, plus 3 feet clearance to each end. And then the standard 14-foot set aside from curb to the outside of the bus here, which will allow for the handicap access as well. So we got the numbers, and we can't fit the 3 buses here. The other bus operations would remain, as would the Greenhouse site. However, we would propose to bring in the NRTA administrative offices down here as well. One of the reasons that we want to do that is so that this can really qualify if we're going for any type of supplemental funding. It's truly an intermodal project, because we have created that integration within the facility itself, as well as the connections to the existing facility. The one thing this would require is for us to reconfigure this intersection here in order for the buses coming out this way to make this turn successfully. It would mean aggressive enforcement of no parking along this curb right here, and possibly elimination of about 4 parking spaces that are part of the triangle here right now, plus some readjustment of the curb dimensions that are here in order to facilitate that turn. But we watched, I believe it was the longest bus make that turn, and it can make that turn without having to take the sidewalk.
Right, but the parking needs to go.
But the parking does need to go. Within this concept, of course, you've got the space for the bus queuing along this way. You've got a dedicated lobby for these passengers here. You have a larger lobby area over here that could serve ferry passengers, NRTA offices up here, and then you still have additional supplemental area that can program to be used as baggage storage for the baggage valet service that's existing out of the building right now, front for tour bus operations, bike rental operations. There's any number of things. What it does critically is it activates that facing along Candle Street, so that you have a continuation of the streetscape there, and it's not a dead wall that's looking out onto one of the busiest streets coming in and out of Denver.
And there's candle across the top. Candle that goes across the.
Candle, yeah, I couldn't, if I turned it this way, I couldn't get the orientation right, so you've got Candle going across the top, Steeple here, and that's Old Whale across the back, and Salem across the top.
In the lobby spaces, is there gonna be, would there be room for, information and, like we have now at Greenhound,
Yeah.
information with our aides and visitor services? Cause I
Yeah.
think that'll be, especially if we're gonna integrate other transportation modes, or this is becoming the hub, to be able to disseminate all kinds of information. Janet, you know, from a visitor standpoint, people coming and the visitor services component,
Within
or
this,
one of those spaces.
well, I was gonna say, within this set aside right here, you've got 5,800 square feet of contiguous space. 2,400 of that is going to you, including the bathrooms. But you've got 5,800 contiguous square feet here, got about 450 here, and about 600 square feet here. So there's actually a little bit more space in this potential option than what we had programmed in the original option A.
I think
But-
location of those services will be key.
Alternative 3 was a further step back off of the prior alternative. In terms of integrating, we had only assumed that we were bringing the NRTA offices into the programming space. Everything else would remain the same. The bus staging along Washington, the bus pad, the existing Greenhound building. What we would seek to do is create a stronger connection between this facility and this facility by looking at the potential of doing Belgian bumps along this area to create a protected pedestrian crossing to facilitate safe pedestrian movement across what we're told are two very busy streets, especially during the height of the summer. And again, same concept layout we were looking at before, potential to do lobby space here. This might turn into tour buses instead of NRTA buses, because the NRTA buses stay up on Washington Street. You still have the ferry space, room for the NRTA offices fronting right out onto Steeple Street at this point, and again, all of the ancillary programming space that you have along that corner for whatever uses you want to lay into those spaces here. This is the connection I was talking about, the Belgian bump. This is considered to be kind of one of the best ways to create strong pedestrian crossings, because with the raised crossing here, it creates an incentive for folks to slow down as they approach this and go over the top of it here, so pedestrians feel much safer moving across this. And you don't have to worry about the ramping that you typically see in order to meet ADA requirements, because this actually brings that flush with the sidewalk and curbs on either side of the road. So, Paul, you want to talk about
Before you go to cost,
any of this? Yeah.
could we just talk about how people give their reactions to
Yeah,
these?
I was going to say, I'm
Okay.
sorry, my
Good time.
momentum carries me
All right,
away.
okay. So what happened to the buses parking along the street?
We still have that under option alternative 3. We still have 3 of the buses stationed along Old Whale. There is potentially enough room to do 2 bus stops here between Candle and the opening of the garage along Steeple. We can't get all 3 there. There's just not enough linear room as far as that goes.
So, I mean, did you exhaust all the opportunities to not use greenhouse? Now, that maybe I didn't phrase it right, but if someone said you can't use greenhouse, it's going away,
Right.
what would you do? Had you gone through that thought process?
We kinda did. The other day with Mike, can you pull up one that shows the site and the roads? If these roadways were gonna be built, perhaps the buses could come in and stage along here, or come in and stage along here, or along one of those roadways to get them all. It kind of breaks them up, but it would get them all onto that site, you know, even if 2 were here. Right, Is that what you were
And
saying?
the traffic flow, I think, is gonna be a lot quicker that way as well.
Yeah, and it helps with traffic. It takes us, I mean, Greenhound was a godsend because it took us out of all of that. But to take us out of all that queuing and waiting and sometimes adding 10 to 20 minutes, to cut us off and be able to come in here or around there if these roads were improved and the turning radiuses were made possible.
At the end of our last meeting, see where the light blue speckled line of
Yes.
this block is?
Yeah.
You showed a bunch of buses there on both sides.
Right,
And then, you know, Paula and her team said, wait a minute, we can't have people get out of a bus on the right hand, on the roadside or something. So that's kind of where I thought we left it, and then
well,
how did
and
that transition? that needs to be
so
updated?
there, you know, operationally, there's the issue with half of the, you know, all of the buses open on the right-hand side. So half of them would actually be opening into a roadway here. Now, one of the things we looked at is could we create an artificial berm that you would essentially close off this section of the roadway for everything except bus operations, create an artificial berm to address that. The answer is yes, you could do that. However, now you have an issue in that one of the things we want to do is retain some consistency where each bus on the line stops. And you have no ability for buses to move around each other as they're queued up here. If you have a bus break down, anything along those lines, it could shut down this entire area. So the other issue that we ran into is if you did the berm between and then still made the allocations to handle ADA requirements, we would be well into the easement and set aside that National Grid needs in order to access their utilities and lay down space here during an emergency. So for all of these reasons, we kind of backed away from this one.
And I think, Jim, your point, you know, if Greenhound goes away, because there's nothing saying that the NRTA could be there forever and ever and ever, or at least the 12 years until I can retire.
Okay, well,
So I think that that's a
I
good,
defer to others, but I thought the premise is that we had to exit that space, but maybe not. Andrew?
I mean, my conversations in the past with Melissa have been, I've seen conceptual drawings for that. That doesn't include you.
no,
So-
I know, and I
okay.
met with her
Right,
to
that's
try to
Yeah.
get that answer, and they have no immediate plans, but she would not say, like, we could be there forever and a day. So.
I always
from-
thought we couldn't be there, all right, let's just,
From an
I mean, I'm
NRTA
not-
standpoint, you
so
know.
how many people thought we couldn't be there? Nod your head. Okay. So that's everybody,
At some
pretty
point.
much everybody in the room except, right?
Right, and that's planning,
No,
that's
it's
what
okay.
we're doing, is we're planning that
Right, I understand.
that they are going to construct a facility to meet their needs that doesn't include you. I mean, and that,
If this happens, yes.
well, whether this happens or not, the word from her was they have a program that they intend to initiate, which takes you out. So it's not a matter of if this or not that, it means that something would have to happen because there is, again, there was a dormitory, there was all kinds of new buildings there. That's a major gateway into the downtown, and there was clear discussion about that, so.
Andy, could you go back to the floor plate showing the, because I had a slightly different question. As I understand the floor plate, this part of the garage is relatively flat.
That is, yes, at the top of that ramp, yes.
And so one of the questions I was asking is, could you take away this 18 feet, cheat the building over to give that lane to get by buses, was the question I was asking. Yes, we lose parking spaces, but is that an option, or does that do something to the map and flow of the garage?
So you're asking, can we take away this string of spaces here along this fronting?
Right, thus allowing the building to shift slightly to leave that lane to get by in the event a bus broke down. Just, and again, partially in this idea of finding different flexible options. That was just one question. So you would lose, in theory,
Right,
about
you'd
15
lose
spaces,
all
about
these
40
spaces here.
spaces, because you're gonna have 3 floors of spaces you would lose.
Conceptually, I don't see why not. Conceptually, I think you could. I think you could do that. It's not gonna change your ramp length at all. It's not gonna change the essential function of the garage. It just reduces capacity.
And it would allow you, if we had to slide the garage, enough space to have an additional lane, if you go back to the site plan
Yeah.
now, right? Just so people, and again, I don't wanna drag this out, but I just wanna make sure all that would allow us to do then is to take this and cheat it this way a little, so there would be room for an additional lane, if that added value in the planning process.
Yeah, you could still get three vehicles worth of queue along this way. And there is the potential then to not only open the 2 spaces that are here, but then to keep some throughway through here
And
as
the
well.
260 spaces or so would drop to 220 or something like that, but still over 200.
Yeah.
So in both alternative 2 and alternative 3, that maintains the 3-level
Yes,
garage with roughly 270 spaces.
yes, ma'am.
And, but in alternative 1, that would have 48 valet parking
Yeah,
spaces.
alternative 1, the entire
No
intermodal
structure.
center takes the site, and there's no way you can get a structure on there.
There's no multi-level structure, it's all 1-story and
Yep.
flat 48 really valet spaces because they're tandem.
They're tandem, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So, the bus store is on the right, isn't that correct? So, the bus, the bus that's up against the sidewalk on essentially Steeple Street, there's not a problem because the door's open and you exit onto a sidewalk,
Right.
right? So, it's really the same all around that whole garage, that the buses could queue anywhere around there, as the door's on the right. So having the 2 lane of buses in Steeple, really, that causes the problem, doesn't it? Because that, I guess if this is oriented north, the southerly bus would empty into the street.
Into the street, or like I said, you could create that berm there, but now you've created a place where you have a high potential for gridlock if anything goes
Right.
wrong, because you're queuing 3 buses nose to back within a restricted lane.
And if you follow that thought, I'm sorry to go to Barry, but Norm had buses queuing along Candle in
Yeah.
his scenario. Remember that?
Yeah.
So Barry?
Yeah, no, and I was gonna ask, I mean, that is another potential that's sitting there. I mean, if it boils down to even eliminating just the few parking spaces that are there to help reconfigure that road and, you know, gain some territory in there, I think that to me is worth it instead of trying to tinker with multiple spaces in the garage or do anything with that.
There's issues with that, with, you know, the congestion that builds up there, how do the buses exit back on Washington Street, to come out? You know, when we were reviewing it, as long as, what Andrew said, that the doors are on the right, any of those roadways that are gonna be made and improved
Yeah.
could potentially,
Yeah, I would agree operationally, Steeple, I believe, they're between New Whale and Candle. If we took the right curb from the bottom to the top, there should be adequate space for all the routes.
cause Mike, what did you say that space was, 150?
Say that one more time. All along Steeple Street? Yeah, I think the preferred alternative that we like is using all of Steeple Street, the north side of Steeple Street, the northern sidewalk as the loading unloading for the buses. You do need to think about a bypass lane if you do stack the lanes on right next to the garage. And I just don't think getting the 20 feet that you would get by eliminating the parking spaces wouldn't yield enough space to add the additional transit lane, a sidewalk landing strip for the people to get out on, and then a bypass lane for buses behind that bus to get around. So I think you need a lot more space than what that 20 feet will provide. I like the concept of just using all of Steeple Street for the NRTA. That'll give you the 6 spaces that they need right now. And then the other curb space that we're talking about, right now it's programmed for other uses like tour vans and Uber. That could be reprogrammed if needed in the future.
So I wanna make sure I'm pointing at this and make sure we're all safe. This gets back to this idea that this would have a radius that worked, and you're using this street for
Yes.
queuing buses.
Right.
And is there enough area in the way those streets will be laid out to make that work?
Do the next step.
We don't have a scale map to work off right now, but thumb sketch, yeah. Yeah,
I think it's kind of up to the owners too, on how wide of a layout they're making available.
And also no curb cuts entering into that property on that street, so you would have the full curb length
Right.
available, right?
yeah, you can count on that along the face of the garage going up and down Old Whale. We're not clear what the concept is going up and down Steeple.
And frankly, again, these are pretty open discussions, so one of the other reasons I thought about the elimination of the spaces I talked about is just the massing of the building. I mean, let's face it, this is a big building for Nantucket, and, you know, we had originally targeted 225 spaces, I think, from your report last time, Andy, and so at 270, I know on one hand, it's more efficient, I get that, you know, efficiency matters, I really do. At the same time, the political side of it says as the garage gets bigger, it just continues to get harder and harder to sell from a massing standpoint. And so, you know, is that last 40 spaces, you know, worth it or not? And that's just a philosophical thought. And by agreeing to some change like that, it means the building smaller, you get a little bit of flexibility in its final setting. And I don't know if that adds value or not. But for me, the last 25 spaces aren't all that critical. Once you break 225, we're in that period where we say the math you've done, we made a big difference. And so, you know, I don't care if it's 270, I don't care if it's 210, when we're in that range.
Yeah,
it's-
the 2
we made a
1/4,
difference.
just to go back, the 2 1/4, to our estimation, covered the most critical of the needs. Are there days where you will need more than 2 1/4? Absolutely. But if you look at the course throughout the entire year, what's going away, what's coming into the area, 2 1/4 is your design target for meeting your needs throughout the entire rotation of the year. From my perspective, because the thing that we're moving into now is the financial analysis. If we go with a smaller option A, a smaller footprint, that's fine, you're gonna reduce cost as far as that goes. And I'm gonna walk you through the exercise in a minute so that you can see sort of our worst case. So if we reduce the size of option A, it improves conditions. If we keep option A as it exists, it improves conditions, and that would include anything that you do on an ancillary basis on the surrounding streets, accommodating Uber, car for hire, buses, et cetera. That still makes the initial financials we're looking at pencil out. The only way this doesn't pencil out is if we talk about making a major modification to the option A design at this point.
Before you do that, I'm gonna pass these around. So I met with, one of the things I owed the group was some information about what used to be down there. I spent a lot of time at the library, I've spent a lot of time, in several historical places. No one can find it other than they all remember that, what was his name? Guy who used to shoot for the Powers. That got a hold of him, he shot them, he remembered shooting them, so I don't know. He has a whole archive of the buildings, but what I'm gonna send you is just to look at, this is the back side of the power plant, these two help give you an idea of the massing of what used to be there. I don't have any from Candle Street. I always thought this was just a pretty picture because people forgot how attractive the building was. And then this is if you were standing at the Stop and Shop looking back at it as you look at these pictures. And I'll send them around, but just gives you some idea of what used to be there and the massing of what was there.
So I'm a little uncomfortable. Are you suggesting we moved on to the financing now without sorting all this stuff out? I think we need to sort this stuff out.
Okay.
I mean,
Why?
I'd ask the group, I mean, or not.
Well, I guess my question is, why do we need to sort this stuff out? If it's going to do nothing but improve your cost numbers here,
I'd ask the group, so.
I'm comfortable getting into the financials. I think that's the next step that we need
well, I
to be
mean,
able to move this forward.
if we want to go back and create some alternatives that we can run finance off of, we've got the model now,
Okay.
so that's easily done.
So do we have an option that does not use greenhouse
Yes.
in one of these? Okay.
We conceived within the 3 I just
Okay.
presented you, no. Can we
No.
put together an option that
Okay.
doesn't, we can put together several.
Okay.
From the sound of everything I'm hearing around this table, we can put together several where we can assume the elimination of greenhouse, the integration of it into one of these options without substantially changing option A.
So I'd ask the group, is that an assumption we should make to have move toward options that do not include
Yes.
land, or should we?
I think.
We
Okay.
have to plan
Andrew's
for that.
kind of explained it pretty, I think, pretty clearly about what's there in their plans.
I think you have to assume that that is not gonna be long-term available to the
Okay.
RFQ.
Okay. So.
And just-
no-
And long-term may not be
Yeah.
long-term.
Just for clarification, the town doesn't have, we don't have any sort of long-term agreement with them, do we? Do we have a lease? Do we have anything?
Year to year.
Here,
Oh,
okay, thank you.
So,
Can I
so
ask one
can we
question,
just,
Mr. Chairman?
yeah,
I just have one
yeah.
thing. Is Wilk, I'm sorry if this is like a late
No.
question. Is Wilk Square, we own Wilk Square, right? Like,
There is a triangle of land in between Washington Candle and the private way that the town owns, yes.
Okay, that's what, that was my next question, private way, part two. Is that part of these options, like, to fit into anything, or is that gonna kinda stay the way it's been? Just because we've always parked like that for
We didn't
100 years.
assume any type, we assumed
I'm
this.
just talking about circulation and flow with Paula's, just different options, I'm just curious, I didn't know, haven't heard about that piece, just curious. The spew faces were mentioned, but I'm just talking about that area,
So
is
with,
how that would fit or not in anything with this.
you're talking about this area right here, correct? So-
Yes,
yeah.
yep,
So if we are talking about any type of configuration, it sounds like we're going that direction now, where we're now looking at bringing bus operations here, or here down Steeple, where they've gotta come through and make this left, you are gonna look at having to do a modification here. You're gonna have to lose a few spaces in order for those vehicles to make that left-hand turn on Washington.
In fairness to Andy, there's a small triangle there with a flag, and it's
With
important to a
like
lot of
8
people.
cars parked around
Right,
it.
and
and
Yeah.
just the car parking around it may be changed now, but the triangle itself
it's still gonna be
probably
there.
shouldn't be
I'm
all that.
just curious
effective.
about that,
Yeah.
as far as reaction and so forth.
And so just to facilitate the discussion, we've agreed that we will look at options that include integrating all of NRTA into the facility, but we'll keep it at that level and move on to financing calculations. Is that
Andrew just had.
Andrew? Yeah.
Well, I don't wanna
No,
derail
go
this,
ahead.
but
No, no, go
but I
ahead.
do wanna
Derail it,
put a
derail
pitch
it.
in that I think that the monument and that needs to be better.
Okay.
It's, I don't think we need to be locked into that current configuration of the monument, which is, the rock in the middle of asphalt. I mean, that was, there's a better way to have that as the gateway into the downtown, so, anyway. And to honor the person that's there, so.
And does that abrogate what I just said, or just include it into the conversation?
I just wanted to include it in. I
Okay.
know we're
Yeah, yeah,
going
yeah.
off into
No,
financing,
no,
but.
no, that's good, okay, good,
Yeah.
okay. All right, are we all in agreement that that's a path we'll take? Yeah, John?
My comments, when you look at it, Andy, you gotta remember that you also wanna design it, and when you think about buses and all these streets may not exist, or they may not exist in a period of time. You really have to make it so it stands alone in the sense of how it operates, or has a minimal amount of other than the perimeter roads involved. Because if you do all of this street grid, and we know that the Stop and Shop's not moving for a period of years, you wouldn't wanna design it in such a way, oh, I'm putting buses here and lining the streets with that. Putting aside the aesthetic of whether that's, or if you were to put all the buses along there, whether that makes it functional, but you also should remember that those streets, especially the grid that you have right there, may not exist ever, or for certainly a period of time. So, now, you may say, yes, but I have to have part of that to make this all work, and I get that, it's just that sort of, because if you're showing 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of 5 street grids that may not exist day one. And I don't know how that changes your analysis, but we've seen it grow from the last time as it related to the bus movements, and I have a feeling if you're gonna try to put everything on the modal facility, it'll grow again. Or you would say your demand will grow again for parking on the street.
I don't think your demand for parking, I don't anticipate growing. There is an issue if we cannot assume the existence of this street and this street at some point during the development, that will hamstring us.
Well, that, just turn to Dave, I mean, do you think those two, because they're gonna be primarily getting National Grid, you know, we've grown the program.
Right.
And grown the dirt, that we're asking for, and, you know, is that,
I thought you guys were gonna go talk to your peeps and find out about that.
I did, I had a conversation with a gentleman named Mike Guerin, I thought he was gonna join the meeting, for whatever reason, he couldn't make it today. And I think the initial, very general conversation, the idea of Steeple Street, if it added value, he was willing to talk about it. He did worry that when you started opening Old Whale the whole way at Steeple, so that would be the street running to the back edge. You know, he did start to say, you know, we're running out of any property that we can develop to kind of offset, you know, the basic things that we hope to get off the property. So I think Steeple Street is something they're gonna be able to get comfortable with. I do think they worry about Old Whale and Steeple being opened and that being a guarantee. So I don't know what happens if you have just Steeple.
So could you just point to Steeple so we're all sure?
The idea I shared with him was, you know, in order to make this work, if we couldn't have width, would they be willing to open this up and work with us so that buses could stack this way? And his first reaction was, you know, there's probably some way for us to get comfortable and wrap our heads around that. The idea of, again, you start out with a footprint and, you know, and the idea of giving up yet another 35 feet for another road and so on, started to worry that, you know, the site is already, like I said last time, more than half of it ends up in public property. To keep eating at that at some point just started to make them nervous.
well, that's why I raised it, because I think the steeple idea works, and we can sell it. I'm not so sure all of that street grid can we sell. Because the problem is it just becomes less and less, and you still have to leave a Stop and Shop building there for some period of time.
So the green hash mark street, that's Old Whale?
This is Old Whale right here, and what I'm
So-
hearing
and we're
is,
hearing that that's less likely?
this
Right.
could, this
I mean, I'm
could
just
go
trying-
away, but
we need to get stuff out on the
some
table.
areas
No,
No,
we
I
make
think you're
assumptions
right.
about it.
I think from a planning standpoint, we shouldn't assume it's there. I think
Okay.
the better move is to move to Candle Street, and if that's where you're going to stack taxis and Ubers and so on. The town has Candle Street, it has a fair amount of width, Michael, I don't know what the width is there. But between the correct placement of the garage and Candle Street, we probably could find a queuing lane for the Ubers and some of the other activities on Candle Street.
So that we go back to the norm plan. We saw
A little bit back to
a
the
little-
north, and not for the buses, but for all the other activities.
Or at least for use of the Candle Street.
Yes.
Okay. So trying to facilitate. Go ahead, Don.
It sounded like you, if you had all of Steeple available at the right width, that the buses could all queue along there. And that was a fairly optimal traffic flow
Yeah,
pattern.
there's benefits to
So if
doing
we
all of
could
that.
just focus everything on that, but it would also have to include, from a National Grid perspective, probably clipping a piece of that corner
Understood.
for them to get the
Right,
turning
yes.
radius.
And early on, we had talked about, as a group of owners, that the surrounding streets all needed improvements.
So should we make a plan that does not include the development of Old Whale?
I would suggest going forward, it does not show that. Likewise, I don't see this happening. This is where Old Whale begins. Right? So if you eliminate
Right,
this and you
right.
eliminate this,
Yeah.
just
It
the
would be all the way up
circulation
to
is.
the
And
like
didn't we
that.
see that as a plan last time?
I think we drew it and talked about it on a
Okay,
piece of paper,
okay,
but I don't
okay,
think we
okay.
actually.
So.
So
yeah.
people would enter the parking garage that same way, I could do this too, but
Need a red, thank you.
yeah, you still need to retain this access right here in order to get in and out of the garage off Steeple.
at that part of
Mm.
Old
Yes,
Whale.
I've got to ask them that question.
So in
frankly.
terms of linear distance, you've got room to do 2 buses between the edge of this lobby here and a reasonable setback off of the exit lane coming out of the garage. And depending on what the configuration of this frontage is, there is enough linear distance there to put 4 buses back to back up and down that side of Steeple Street, if we can bank on being able to do that. And this entire conversation grew out of this discussion the last time we all
Right.
met, talking about what if anything, can we assume is available outside the pad?
And
So I'm
last time
saying
we
if you
couldn't,
took
last
New
time we couldn't reach consensus, and I think now maybe we're getting a little closer.
Yep. I think if you take like Old Whale off if you need the piece that's right by the substation, then I'll certainly sit with National Grid again, and that may become critical to access to the garage, and have to talk them through that.
Dave, can I just add one more thing? I don't know what the street's called between Steeple and Salem Street. There's like a half block there. Right now, that street, as is proposed, and it doesn't have a name yet, I don't think, but that's right in the back of the grocery store. So I would think that would be your freight lane, or for deliveries and whatnot, and you would need a portion of Old Whale, at least between Steeple and that street, unnamed street, and that would be your back alley, for lack of a better word, and that would allow the operations of the grocery store to happen flawlessly until the rest of Old Whale is developed.
Yeah, I think that idea is I think something that the owners would want total control over, and so I don't, show it as a street. I think when they come up with their plan for how they access their facilities, they lay it out on their property and manage it like they would a driveway. And I think they're looking to reserve that, frankly.
So we're, correct me if I'm wrong, we're eliminating, we're integrating all of an RTA that's currently on Greenhound into the new facility. And we're, the only interior street we are assuming for planning purposes is Steeple. Is that, I'm looking for either
Yes.
shaking yes
Is
or
that
nodding.
including Dave's concept of the 25 spaces going away as well?
We
Kind
haven't
of.
gotten to that part yet.
Okay.
We're just talking external.
Okay.
I'm just talking
I'm
external.
saying the space,
It didn't sound like that was needed if you could do 6 buses on Steeple.
No, it's not, you don't necessarily need to reduce that unless we find that by putting, remember, you're talking about putting buses here and they have to, the buses themselves run, I wanna say 10 feet in width. I'm trying to remember the dimensions. that you
there's
said.
9 feet.
10 inches.
So 10 feet in width, and then your set aside for ADA requirement is another 6 from the curb?
Yeah.
For the chair lifts.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got 16 feet here, figure you need at least another 10-foot clear here. If we find that that's now infringing on something at this end, then yeah, we need to look at elimination of this in order to move the entire structure over so that we can accommodate that width. We're kind of in the dark right now on where the line is here. We know that we can't put any type of permanent structure over there. Beyond that, we're a little bit in the dark. So we can either design assuming that we need to create that additional width, or we can continue to hold option A as it's currently laid out right now and reserve the right to make that adjustment in time when need be.
I think the curb line in this conceptual plan does give you the 28 feet, so it looks like it's there.
So are you asking how wide Steeple should be?
I'm
just asking, I'm trying to understand what you're.
I'm asking, as I did the last time, we're laying this down over the top of a concept plan dated back in 2016.
Right.
And that concept plan had roadways and buildings, et cetera, here. We're doing design right now on what we're fairly clear is a defined footprint and structure.
Yeah.
And our understanding of what, if anything else is available, ends at the edge of that footprint or structure. So if you're asking me what I'd like an understanding for what's happening in and around the rest of the area so that when I make these assumptions, I know that there's some basis for making these
So I thought we were saying you get Steeple. I mean, you get Steeple.
Yeah.
Okay? And then you get the ability to, well, all you get is Steeple. So you could drive down Commercial to New Whale to Steeple. Right?
And
Is that?
it's reasonable to assume that we have 26 feet of width
I don't know, you tell me.
across Steeple.
I think it has to be, if we're talking about eliminating those other streets,
Yeah.
which is going to focus the traffic on a few,
Yeah.
fewer
I mean,
streets.
you need it wider?
I think that, well, I don't like to get locked in on
Okay,
the
all right,
street
okay.
width right now.
Okay.
I think if we're giving up we're giving up Old Whale in the locations that we're talking about, I think the pressure is on to make sure that Steeple can accommodate all the traffic needs. And that's fine, I think it can be, but I think it does drive that to be wider. And I mean, I am concerned about losing that direct access into the parking.
So I will bring that up.
I think that's a mistake. I mean, the little section of Old Whale between Commercial and Steeple, I mean, the others to me don't appear as critical, but.
And to be very frank, in fairness, they're not here, is the bulk of our conversation was about New Whale right directly behind the transit center, was
Yeah.
not, you know, specifically that cut through for access to the garage. So
Why
I-
does
I
that cut
speak
through,
for
why
them.
do you like that cut through, Andrew?
Because it provides, otherwise you're bringing all the traffic down Commercial,
Yeah.
around New Whale and then back up. So
Yeah.
you're mixing it all in with the buses, and it's not a really
Oh,
direct.
you're bringing
route.
all the
Yeah.
parking garage traffic.
Right, so the
Okay,
cut-
okay,
right.
okay.
Because you kind of want to get them in and into the garage and not queued up out into the street.
So John, is that, what do you
Yeah.
think, is that worth?
No, it absolutely makes sense. This is a matter of, selling it to National
Yeah.
Grid that, we're gonna bifurcate the reserve.
I know, and that's, I mean, that's a,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
that's
that's.
a big, I mean, it creates a lot less value.
I mean, I know what we're gonna say, which is even for the reserve area, it's just a street, so don't worry about it. We're not gonna put any structures there. We're gonna say something like that.
Mhm.
Whether we can sell that idea, I don't know. That's not, I mean, I think we could sell the steeple idea. I mean, you know, again, just to be very plain, this has become bigger
Yeah.
than we ever showed anyone.
Yeah, I'm
So-
concerned, I mean, I know, I don't mean to be negotiating now, but I'm concerned that we're asking a lot for a lot of interior roadways that we, I mean, that are over and above the initial ask. So.
But you gotta design it so it works, so.
No, I understand,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm trying to,
Yeah.
So,
This is a 200-year plan.
and-
You gotta
I
work.
and I'm trying to understand the value of that little strip between, you know, between planning and the owners, so should you want us to, like, throw it in, John, for now, and Dave?
Well, Dave, what do you
or-
think?
I think, you know, to be clear, I'll say this again, I wanna point at things. I think it's fine showing commercial, I think we should show these rounded corners and show that it works with steeple. It's okay to show this, I would eliminate this.
Yeah.
And here, you might show it as, you know, private access or something for now.
I would eliminate it for now if
I
we're
would
showing
too,
this
yeah,
plan.
I would do that, yeah.
Because that's just gonna create another layer of.
Anxiety.
Well, I was, so going forward, any presentation we do like this, just so you know, I'm just doing a blacked out overlay on all of this. So we
Mhm.
take that issue off the table. We know that we have this network right here, we're not gonna worry about the rest of the network, that's what we have to work with at this point.
And is the Old Whale section between Salem and Strait, that doesn't seem to be critical? The northern,
If we can take that off too, to some of it would be helpful.
okay.
Because we're trying to show how the intermodal facility and then say, what is
Yeah.
what are we committing to become public or quasi-public ways? Because the issue that we run into, you're going to have someone in the finance group at National Grid's gonna say, well, wait a minute, that's 40 feet wide, that's
Yeah.
300 feet
Right.
long, and 12,000 square feet, and 12,000 quarter of acre, and that's worth X. Now, that's not everybody around this table's problem, but it's just reality, what we gotta talk about.
I think
Okay,
the-
so,
just
same foot, go ahead.
I think the easiest way to explain that north strip thing is until the Stop and Shop changes, it sort of functions as the way it functions, without getting into the what ifs and sort of like, kind of like Greenhound a little, in a sense. It's gonna go someday, but we don't know exactly what's gonna happen, but we know it's not forever.
Yeah, my only caveat to that
It's
is.
an alley situation back there.
Having
you know.
heard the Remain discussion though, I would plan a facility and a layout that assumes that goes away.
Yeah, right.
Because that could go away next year.
Yeah.
Right, right, okay.
That's, you don't wanna plan this and then say, hey, we don't have enough, it doesn't fit.
Okay.
That's no sense.
Okay, so we're gonna include,
Makes sense.
you know, steeple, and I guess we're gonna include that little part of
Yes, you are.
New Whale?
Yes.
Okay, of Old Whale?
Old Whale.
Okay. And we're gonna stay with the building's gonna be in the same footprint that we're not moving the building or shrinking the building or adding the building?
Buildings staying in the same footprint.
Okay,
The good news is, you have enough space that if Greenhound went away and you had to bring their operations over and accommodate NRTA's offices, and you would still have quite a bit of square footage left over for all of the other uses you might want to program into this. And if we have the ability to stack it up and down Steeple Street, we now have enough linear distance potentially to move all of the bus stops over there as well. So we could make this work within the footprint with minor modifications, and it doesn't substantially change what we've designed so far in option A.
And in terms of an ask, John and Dave, when we begin to go public with this, you'll have to give us some idea about how public we can.
Oh, I
be
think we're gonna have to
about
know that people will commit to allow this, whatever traffic pattern is needed in order to make the intermodal facility work.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to be able to say, we can deliver that as part of
Yes.
the initial day one. Yeah,
So
I think-
I guess I'm
that's up to
prompting
us.
that you folks will have to have
Right.
a sense of that.
I would just say to you, to the extent you can limit it, because it would be good, and to show the future part that we really don't know, except we can leave that off. I mean, it may come out exactly like that, but might not. I think would be better for just purposes of selling it internally. But you need to make sure it works. And, you know, we've talked to everybody about New Whale and commercial and straight work. Now we're gonna have to make corners work and layouts work, and you have to give up dirt to be able to do that. We've had those discussions, so.
Okay. All right. I think I'm glad we had this conversation. So you're gonna come back with another alternative? Couple of alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, we can show
Continue to massage this?
a final plan that integrates what we've discussed here, the staging along Steeple, the integration of the Greenhound operations, NRTA offices, and the remaining set aside for other uses on that site. We can do all of that. The one thing I can't do with the plan I've got right now, and there may be no way around it, because there may not be a plan we can work off of. But, you know, in a perfect world, I'd love to be able to put turning templates on this street grid at the bottom end of it in order to confirm that the buses can all make that swing and that the vehicles can all make that swing as well. I'm not so much worried about the private vehicles and the buses. We need to verify that. However, I don't think any scale plan of this exists right now. This is a concept plan only, right?
I have a older scale plan that would show the detail of New Whale and commercial that you could check for the turning radiuses of Steeple. I could probably get you a blow up of that intersection so that you could lay out what it would take.
I mean, ultimately, the other thing we can do is basically, you know, run a turning sequence in clear air, if you will, and come back and tell you what the schematics for that might be. How wide your roadways need to be, what your setbacks need to be on the turns and curves, and then you can lay that over the top of anything and say,
That would be helpful.
this is what we need
Yeah,
this
what do you think?
in order to make this work.
We just get either permission to release it, but at a minimum, I think what you just described would be very helpful.
Okay.
Okay. Matt, did you have a
No,
question? I'm sorry.
no,
Okay.
good.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Now the fun.
all right, so,
This is the part I like.
option A,
It's the hardest part.
at least based on our discussion, is going to exist within roughly the framework that it's in right now. Now, the last time when Norman was down here, he had laid out initial cost estimate on option A. We were asked to go back and take a hard look at this, and a hard look at the numbers. We went back and did a lot of digging, and what we did was we came back and made significant adjustments in a number of cost items. I can provide you with the table with all of the minute footnotes in it that talk specifically about what those are, but I'll give you the top of the waves right now. Basically, line items 1, 2, 3, and 4, we made significant adjustments to assume that we were looking at challenging conditions, either significant amount of excavation and fill, challenging conditions when it comes to setting the foundations. So we kind of worst case those, if you will. On 13, which is paint, graphics, and striping, typical set aside, we made a significant adjustment upwards on that to assume that we were going with top of the line painted sign and graphics within this facility here. was gonna have to be very aesthetically pleasing. There's gonna be a high level of fit and finish on all of these to make this a showcase facility. And then with 17, I bumped the number on there as well. This is your parks, this is your access control equipment. I also assumed inclusion of a parking guidance system as well, so that this is a marquee facility when it comes to customer service here. When folks pull in, they know exactly on what floor the available spaces are.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so that they can, they don't have to patrol up 1 and 2.
Tell
if
them
I
where to
bring-
go, tell them what space to go to?
Not necessarily what space,
Oh,
but
oh, oh,
it'll
oh.
give you a zone within the facility, so that you know if you go up to 3, there's 8 empty spaces up there. You don't have to keep looking for all the spaces on the lower levels. I can up this a little bit more to make adjustments. If we're gonna stage vehicles along Steeple, I wanna actually include a set aside to also do real-time displays in the lobby so that folks know when the where the buses are and when they're coming up to that location. So I may tweak that number a little bit more when we come back the next time. In addition to all of this, we added several line items. 18, which is auxiliary area fit and finishes, we're putting in $10 per square foot just to make sure that before anybody moves into those areas, you've got top quality fit and finish. I included $35 per square foot for the entire external perimeter of the facility for architectural facade. That what I did is I went and I looked what it would take to do custom brick covering across the entire facade here. And the numbers I was getting back were initially $25 to $28 per square foot. So I went for 35. So we're gonna err to the side of caution on that. We also included $6 per square foot across the entire facility for any type of aesthetic allowances. So if you want metal roofs on top of the elevator towers, if you want weather vanes, if you want special sconcing across the perimeter, we have over $500,000 allocated within this budget for that. So Norm's initial estimate was around $7 million. We're now clocking in at around $11.7 million just in hard construction costs. We got a 10% contingency on construction, 35% inflation factor because we're doing it on Nantucket for the challenges that are involved in trying to do island construction. And then a 25% allocation for soft costs takes your total project cost up to $21.8 million. This is a $81,000 per space parking facility.
Questions?
In order of magnitude, we're talking about something that's above grade. Normally, when you start talking about these numbers, you're talking about something that's below grade. If you've ever been to the Post Office Square facility, when they did that, including the plaza up top, that was $125,000 per space. So we're erring to the side of conservatism on this cost estimate at this point.
Extremely conservative, right, in my world, right? So we started out with it's 8 million, and because we've done all the things you're doing, and I'm not telling you not to do them, but I think it's important that it's not unrealistic to think that if you set a budget for this in whatever the next phase is, that the budget could be less, because this is assuming many things and many overheads, right? I used to do a lot of budgeting work, and a normal contingency at this point in planning is 25%. You're at about 55%.
Where's the build out for the NERDA? Where's the build out cost for the NERDA facility?
They are included in the auxiliary area general construction costs at $150 per square foot, and then the auxiliary area fit and finish is
Okay,
at $10 per
okay,
square
okay.
foot. So we're talking about $160 per square foot for that 5,800 square feet that's envisioned right now.
Other questions?
Yeah, just having looked at the numbers, if you have hard cost times 2 as your project, that's like almost unheard of. I mean, to go with 11 million in hard costs with a $22 million project, because there are contingencies built into the base numbers in which then 25 to 35 points were added to the contingencies. So in some cases, you have, 45% contingency.
So I'm simply saying it's a pretty conservative number.
And the reason, again, that we did this is when I talked to you last time, what I said we were gonna do is we were gonna figure out what the total cost on this was, and then we were gonna back into what you might need to collect in order to offset that cost. So I wanted to go with a worst-case scenario.
When does this assume construction beginning?
It's not, this has got enough cushion in it that it's not necessarily time dependent at this point.
What does that mean?
Inflation.
We've gone conservative enough that you could see up to a 5 to 7% inflation rate off
Yeah.
of these numbers going forward. These are all based off of historicals that we've
I see.
actually added inflation factors to. And then we inflated them again by an additional 5 to 7% over what we adjusted for 2018 numbers. So
Again, I mean,
You
the
could-
assumptions assume a certain
Right.
construction groundbreaking.
Yeah.
So and they're good for X number of years.
You could push groundbreaking out to 2021 and
Okay.
be within reasonable.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Within
Which is
reasonable
not
limits right now.
unreasonable.
Yeah.
That's not an unreasonable number.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, when I was trying to figure out debt service, I went with very conservative terms that we've seen for a traditionally financed public project. 4% over a 25-year term here at 21.8 million. It's going to give you an annual debt service cost of about 1.9 million on this structure. In terms of how we would potentially staff this, our assumption was that we would be staffing this for hire through a professional parking operator. The pay rates, the allocations for taxes, benefits, workers' comp, uniforms are all based on the Boston statistical area here at the 85th percentile for pay rates at this point. So we made an assumption for conservative pay rates and conservative compensation rates. And again, this is assuming that this is a private company that you've contracted to provide these management services and this staffing. You'd have,
Where's is there a management fee over top?
the management fee is actually on the larger P&L sheet.
Okay.
So our assumption is you would look at doing this under a management agreement. So the operating costs would be a pass-through. The manager would make a small management fee, was essentially their profit. They would provide all of the staffing and handle the day-to-day operations. All the revenue stream would come to the town. And then you would compensate the operator for any OpEx.
For people who know more about the hourly rates, does that seem the reasonable hourly rate for those folks, maintenance workers?
If they got a free house.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
And that would be and that, you'd have to have housing in
To be
the
kids.
operating. You'd have to have housing.
You'd have to
Entry-level.
include housing in
Yeah.
it? Okay. This is why we're vetting this now. It's not a cost.
I mean,
I think they're all very low.
I mean, you got
think they're
it's an
low, too.
entry-level type job though, too. Like I could envision the local, I don't wanna say local student, but
I don't see.
summer jobs.
Well, I ran this by,
This would be their second job or their first, and they have another job at night, doing something else.
Yeah, the 6 to 2.
I ran this by Valley Park of America,
Okay.
just to see if
Oh,
this
okay.
met Ted Shagnan's sniff test here.
Okay.
And he came back and said these were within reason for what he's paying for the people that he's got
Here.
operating right
Here.
now
Oh, the,
here.
what's it
Seasonal.
called?
Yeah, on
Yeah.
a seasonal
Yeah, yeah,
basis.
good, okay, good. And
The housing thing, I have not factored in, and I'm gonna need to work with you to figure out what kind of cost allocation.
I
is
want to be
required.
careful, I think we're competing with Stop and Shop. By that I mean that the people that
Right.
would work at Stop and Shop, that would work at a cashier's, that might work at Island, that would be the entry level at Island Gas. They're all in the $22 to $24 an hour range with benefits.
Yeah.
And that's who we're competing for.
Well, that pay rate is just gross wage, right? That's not
That's not including
loaded with
benefits.
benefits as well.
No, but I'm saying, so you show the benefits and the cost of all those further up. So, my point just being, I know we just, at Harbor Fuel, we just hired 2 people at $24 an hour with college degrees. So I know that what
Can I ask just a different,
Absolutely.
not different, associated question? Automation,
Mhm.
and I'm not an expert, you don't know me, sorry, you're doing a great job.
Quite all right.
I say things occasionally that you have to think about what I'm saying. I was at this,
That's a departure from the last
Parking-
person that said.
yeah, I
that, so-
know, I know that. I've been thinking about that a little bit, actually. Assembly Square in Somerville.
Yes, sir. Know it well.
Have you ever been in that parking garage?
I have. I was part of the design team. for
I'm
that.
I'm the dumbest guy on the planet when it comes to high tech, and I
Mhm.
figured that out in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's good design.
Damn right it is. That was as easy as getting one of those little
He's taking a bow now.
carts
Right.
at Logan Airport
Yep.
that cost $1,
Oh, really?
and you can't figure out how to get it out of the thing, and you say, oh, I can put my credit card in this little thing. I was like, click,
Yep.
and the thing comes out, $3. Doesn't, first hour's free. By the time you figure out where you're gonna go to eat, you've already used up an hour. That was a slick little place there. And all I could think about was Nantucket. I sent Mike a bunch of pictures. I'm like, this is Nantucket, and this little thing
Mhm.
fixed up, probably was a brownfield site at one time.
It was. It was an old.
I mean,
Ford
it had
Assemblies.
to be.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, is all of these people needed in today's planet?
So,
Okay,
when I did the line item cost estimate for your access control system, I assumed that this was a facility that was going to have a central cashier station that was staffed, say, 8 o'clock in the morning until midnight. You're also gonna have 2 automated pay stations that will take cash and credit cards that you can install in the lobby. So as folks are coming back to their car, they stick their ticket in, they process the payment, it gives them a validated ticket, they stick it in the reader at the exit, they're out there on their way. You can also use debit and credit card at the exit too. So this is a partially automated system. It will run fully automated from 10 o'clock or midnight to 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. the next day. But you still have attendants, and those attendants are here really for 3 reasons. One, they're there to staff that cashier's booth when it needs to be staffed in the lobby of the facility. They're there to do minor janitorial tasks, and they're there to assist
Security.
folks.
Assistant.
You're gonna get a broad variety of folks coming in. Some of them are gonna be very savvy when they're confronted with this equipment. They use it every day. Some of it may see it for the first time.
Yeah.
You do need that human presence
the-
there to help
It's like the
them
child
process
card
that.
thing. It's not
Yeah.
completely unstaffed.
And then
Yeah.
the third function that they're doing is regularly walking through the facility. People have the conception that parking facilities are dangerous. And the number one thing you can do, in addition to great lighting and great finishes, is have a human element that's regularly passing through this. Now, I would anticipate this is a busy facility anyhow, so that will cut down on that perception of danger, but having these people doing a regular walkthrough is just going to
I got it.
reduce any opportunity for crime and improve folks' perceptions of safety.
Yeah, got it.
So we are overstaffing this, if you will, so that again, we're looking at a top flight operation. By the way, if you're ever confronted with anybody that tells you parking garages are unsafe, I can send you a bunch of literature from the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Only 2% of all property crime, 2% of all personal crime and 3% of all property crime happens in a parking facility. Your most unsafe place is actually your home or the street in front of your home. So parking facilities are very safe.
It's just television and movies, that's the problem.
They're good places to stage movies.
So in looking at operating expenses, the way that we built this is you've already seen kind of the payroll and labor costs. Those were just prorated across the entire facility. Some of the other fixed costs like utilities, insurance, et cetera, were taken from operating statements that we have for comparably sized facilities in the Commonwealth and prorated going across. Some of them were fixed set-asides like the elevator maintenance costs. That's a quote that we actually get from a couple of different vendors as far as a budgeting number. Big numbers that may bear future scrutiny here. When I was trying to figure out property taxes on this, I basically used the project value as the assessed rate and used a plug number that we use in Boston of $4.25 per $1,000 worth of valuation. When I was talking to Janet earlier, and that may be a high number, I don't have a feel for that.
So this is
Here
a
on the
question,
island.
why would we be paying property?
Yeah, I mean,
You wouldn't be unless you're doing a third, the third grade. you
Oh,
know,
okay, okay.
Well, and again, this is, I'm
Okay,
worst
all right,
case in
okay.
this,
yeah,
so,
yeah, you are.
you know, that's something we may pull completely out of the mix.
I may pay for housing.
You had asked about management fee. That's running across, second line across the bottom, starting $15,000 a year, increasing by 3% annual inflation. We're also
Did you vet that with valet parking?
Yeah.
Valet America, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other allocation that will look a little unusual is the sinking fund allocation. This is a best practice that we do with every project.
Maintenance.
We assume you're doing a set aside in for major repair and replacement
We
later
need that.
on.
Where's bathroom clean?
Part of the staffing.
Yeah, well, it's part of the staffing, it's the
Okay.
supplies. There's also a $95 per space allocation for R&M, so we got it covered somewhere
As
in
long as it's not me.
there. It never occurred to me to have you do that, but that would be a cost savings. So, in terms of OpEx for something like this, you're starting at about $573,000 a year, and you're increasing at 3% annual inflation going across the first 10 years. From a cost per space basis, it's about $2,100. Order of magnitude, most municipal structures that we look at tend to go in the $900 to $1,400 per space annual OpEx. So $2,100 is something you would expect to find in a high-end commercial garage in downtown Boston. So this is a pretty solid number. So backing into this, if we've got $573,000 and change in OpEx, annual debt service of 1.3 million, that's that $115,000 and change monthly payment annualized, your net cost is gonna be about $1.95 million. Simple proration, if you divide that net cost by 270 spaces by 12 months a year, it's $603 per space per month that you would need to collect in order to offset the cost on this. In my business, we look at each one of these benchmarks and we ask ourselves how feasible this is. This one concerns me, I'm not gonna lie to you, because I think the most you could potentially get in this kind of market for a monthly pass would be about $200 a space, so you would have to sell 3 of those for every space in the structure to generate this. So going with a monthly only operating format is probably not feasible with this. However, if you prorate this cost over 360 days a year, over all the spaces, you'd need to collect an average of $20 per space per day over 360 days a year in order to offset it. This is slightly more feasible as far as a benchmark goes. Further breaking this down, if I took this number and I assumed that this garage, each space is gonna turn over 3 times a day, we're down to a daily cost of $6.71. Another way to approach this is, I looked at dividing total cost out over 4,320 hours per year. How did you come up with that number, Andy? Well, I assumed 12 operating days per year, 360 days a year, gets you to 4,320. You'd have to collect an average of $1.68 an hour in order to offset that. So this is one benchmark that we use to sort of test this out. It's a sniff test. This is kind of a gross test, so
Before you move, let's ask,
Yeah.
let's see if there are questions about that.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I'm getting into this now a little bit. Have you, I'm gonna ask a kind of a Nantucket question, as somebody that's on the selectmen that might ask this question.
Okay.
Have you ever done an analysis that has a community that gives away everything and all of a sudden wants to charge? Because technically, everything is free
Yes.
here, and it's assumed almost like an entitlement of free, especially the A&P lot, that's what I call it. So when we look at something like this, I mean, see, I'm not worried about the cost, about making money. I'm worried about just getting the concept in everybody's mind that we don't own this whole area.
Right.
And the airport is now downtown without a runway. It's basically true.
Yeah.
And 22 years ago, when those generators breathed their last breath, there was no fast boat yet until the winter of 1996, and it only carried 49 people. This is true, okay? So, that little picture in the ice down there. So, have you looked at, like, I guess I would call it a subsidy analysis, sort of like what the town does with the Island Home and other things that we do with the dump and all of that kind of stuff. If this is something that is gonna, it needs to bake in to the public, okay? We write checks for stuff without even calling the article for $40 million, okay? Schools and different things, they don't even call it. This is gonna get called. It's just my point is, you're doing a really good job figuring this out for somewhere else, as far as how you would think as a business, where government center, wherever it is, Fenway area, where you're gonna have this turnover. We have control. This is one thing the town has control over, is the trucks and the vehicles that are parked at the town lot, and then they come out here and that whole thing. That's gonna all change if and when this happens. But at the same time, the local voter isn't parking in the town lot on the weekends for work. They're parking there to go on the High Line or whatever they're doing, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I think there needs to be some way of explaining that, and I'm not exactly sure how you could do it, but some kind of subsidy analysis that ties into the current situation that we have in downtown Nantucket. Like Mike's got the total number of space, I'm sure you already know that those numbers, I think it's 700 and something or whatever it is. Doesn't include the E&P lot, because we don't own that.
Yes.
But people live like we own it since the 60s.
Well, and that 225 number that you heard,
Yeah.
that factors in the displacement when that goes away.
No, I knew that.
Yeah.
I already knew that before, yep.
So we're not assuming.
You're not adding anything.
We're not adding it. We're assuming all those vehicles that use it, even though it's
It's
not.
just gonna appear in the garage.
Well,
or whatever.
they're displaced, right? They're gonna have to find some place to go, and that's where that 2.25, 200 number comes from.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, okay.
In answer to your question, this has been contemplated before. Another one of my clients, Provincetown, did this a number of years ago here. We are still working with Bar Harbor to get them to the place. We were very close to getting them to make that jump. They lost that vote by 4. They're gonna make another run at it here probably this fall. Barnstable, Hyannis had to make this move at some point. So it is a move that's feasible. In answer to your question, you teed me up very nicely here.
So one more question.
Yeah.
Before you leave.
Yeah.
I want to ask if there are other questions along the slide.
I had a question.
Yes.
The annual debt service, I wrote down 1.9, but up there you have it at 1.382.
Yeah, I may have misquoted that here. The annual debt service is 1.3, the net cost is 1.9. That factors in the OpEx and the annual debt service.
So one way of thinking about it is if we built this garage and it was free, it would cost us about $2 million a year.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
completely,
Yeah.
If we didn't charge,
270
we had no
spaces
revenue.
and they're free parking.
Yeah, if you never want to charge anything for them, just open it up for
Which is
general use.
something interesting, that Naples, Florida, their garage is free.
Mhm.
And I've just always found that was kind of an interesting way of doing it.
So are these numbers, I'm trying to phrase the question, are these numbers that you look at to see how realistic they are? Or I'm trying to think of a number that you would test whether it's, whether the market would sustain.
Yeah,
I'm
these-
having a hard time phrasing it.
These are done in isolation to looking,
Okay,
to stress testing the market. This is initial gut check
okay,
to say, if I have to turn around and sell this
yeah.
tomorrow, can I potentially sell the idea of using this facility at $1.68 per hour? Or is that something that's gonna die in the vine? There's no way I can sell this using this facility. There's no way I can go to the public and say, we're gonna sell leases in this facility at $600 per month. And we think we're gonna get enough buyers in order to self-finance this. I don't think you can ever make that argument. Can you make an argument that says we may start off charging, $1.75 per hour? You could
But
potentially.
there's a big gap between charging
Yeah.
and collecting the revenue, because as you said earlier, that this is about 40% utilized,
So,
right?
we're going there.
Okay, all right, okay.
You guys always jump me here.
I'm sorry.
So another way to look at this is to look at it from a revenue generation standpoint. And in order to do that, I need to come up with a concept first and then test it according to what I understand of the market. So this is a rate scenario here. And this is something that has been done in other locations, especially where you have a seasonal or resort component here. And basically, in these locations, there's usually 3 different rates that are in effect. There is an off-season rate that's set as low as possible, because most of the time it's local residents that are using this. You want to make it super accessible to them. There's a high season rate, which is set because that's when you want to make your bulk of your money, and then a shoulder season rate, which is usually a blend of the two. I didn't benchmark this against anything. This is just for demonstrative purposes, so I just put together a fairly simple rate structure that progresses along simple lines. Off season, it's $1 per hour. Shoulder season, it starts at $1 per hour, and then it inflates by a factor of 2 up to a certain point. And then high season, we start 2, 4, 6, 8, and go up from there. The reason that the 5 to 6 hours is highlighted is when you look at the anticipated composition of all the users that might come into this facility, you're gonna have some folks that come in for just an hour. You're gonna have some folks that come in for just 2 hours. But you're also gonna have a lot of folks who are coming in for 6 to 12 hour cracks, 12 to 24 hour cracks, because this is where they're gonna wanna park and get on the High Line, or potentially get on the steamship. So on average, your average length of stay we anticipate is gonna be between 5 and 6 hours, which corresponds to the 6, 12, and 12 number. This is the number that I need to use in order to gut check my assumptions for revenue. So here's my assumptions for revenue. So off-season, January 1st to April 30th, we've got 270 spaces. At the busiest, I'm gonna assume the garage is only 66% occupied. There's only 178 vehicles parked in that facility. During this period, there's 120 days within that cycle. I'm gonna assume that the garage is going to be this busy only on about 67% of those days total. So I've only got about 80 peak days that are occurring. So I'm gonna take 178 vehicles, I'm going to multiply them over 80 peak days. I'm gonna assume that those spaces are gonna turn over twice a day. That's gonna give me about 28,000 vehicles that I'm charging $6 a piece on to make $170,000. In terms of utilization, because you had asked about the 40% factor, this translates into an average utilization of about 44% over this period. This is highly conservative because you got 40 days here where we're assuming that nobody's in the garage and we're not collecting anything. So when we start talking about subsidies, when we start talking about adjusting these rates to accommodate the realities, this methodology gives you that room to do this.
I like it.
Because we're going hyper conservative and saying, what do we think we can throw off, assuming fairly conservative terms? What is that gonna give us? And it gives us room then to work backwards when we start getting to these policy decisions. So this is your off-season here, this is your off-season here, these are your shoulder seasons. During prime time, we assume this garage is gonna be full 200, yeah, it's gonna be full all 91 days, and it's gonna turn over up to 4 times a day. So of all of these assumptions, that's probably the most aggressive. If we can hit all of these assumptions, we're talking about something that has the capacity to throw off up to $2.1 million against that annual cost of 1.95. This doesn't necessarily include any assumptions regarding debt service coverage ratios, because I didn't have any ideas on that yet. It doesn't assume any sort of set aside if you've got debt reserve requirements. But as sort of an initial sniff test, this shows that you do have the potential to create something that if you wanted to, you could potentially look at as a self-financing mechanism here.
So, questions or comments?
I guess I got one more to add. I want to prolong grant funding, potential state, federal,
Thank
et
you.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
This doesn't include any of that.
You're right, this does not include any of it. And the reason this doesn't include any of it is because primarily I've always worked with federal sources.
Sorry.
Back in the day, at one time, you knew that you could usually get TA 21 funds for this, especially during the Bush administration. The FTA was heavily funded in order to give those out. When Obama came in, it was Tiger grants. Under the current administration, most of that federal funding has disappeared. So now you're looking at state sources. And the best expert I have on state sources of intermodal funding is sitting right behind Don, and he's going to talk about how something like this is done at the state level.
So before we go to that, could we go ask other questions or comments about the revenue scenario?
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that, Jim. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I have just one, I mean, I know, I've heard the 40% occupancy, you know, I think at one of the meetings in the past, and I think it's important that, you know, in a seasonal community, you're going to have, if you annualize things, like, for example, the jetties is empty, you know, 50–60% of the year, it's still one of our facilities, it's still needed to operate during the peak. So I'm.
No, I think he lays that out.
No, I know, and I
No,
think it's
I think it's
good.
good
what
not
he
just
means.
to throw that 40% around, because it's really there's a range of utilizations.
I just have heard that as a reason not to do it, like, I think there was a comment, at least maybe from the public, that said, oh, we're gonna have a building that's 40% empty during the winter, which I think is an assumption, and I think there are ways to program, you know, I think this is good to do it as conservative as possible, but.
I think you'll absolutely find that in the winter, in reality, there are going to be a lot of people parking there overnight that are commuting,
I agree.
if they can.
Absolutely.
It all comes back to your rate structure.
Well, you know what's gonna end up happening?
I
You're
think
gonna have
that
to limit
everything is so
permits.
conservative here, the number
Yeah,
of
well,
You're gonna have to
buildings
limit them,
building is.
I was gonna
because
say
they're gonna
that-
run out of space for people that turn it over all day.
That's one of
what's
the
gonna
things that
happen.
we haven't even delved into
Yeah.
is the question of permits. But again, this conservative take gives
Yeah.
you that ability when we start having that conversation. How much wiggle room do we have in order to accommodate those? How many can we give away and still hit these marks? This gives you the ability to quantify that.
Can
The
I also-
100%. Oh, go ahead.
Can I just flip one other, two things? So the average capacity rate's about 65%, just doing the math in my head, if you wait by number of days.
Yeah.
But the other is, you have not included, or did I miss it, rental income from the.
No,
the space?
that's not included in this either, because again, we don't have an idea on how to quantify that right now.
Yeah.
So again, this is worst case. Rental comes in, you get grants, any type of award that will allow you to reduce that capital cost. Your budget comes in better than we projected. This picture gets rosier and rosier.
Right.
But under the darkest day, we still have the potential to come in at a net cash positive balance.
So John, what's
Well,
your smell test?
No, my smell to, and Andy and I talked about it, federal funds, he's right, under the current administration.
Tony, before you go, what do you think of these numbers?
Oh, I like the numbers because reality is, I think you're gonna find higher utilization in the off-peak period.
Okay.
Because I think people are gonna use it as it relates to commuting. I like the fact that he drove those numbers down as, you know, pretty substantially. I think it does give you the opportunity, and it's quite the right, you know, if Nantucket wants to provide a permit program or a free program or a school deal or something, you'll have that opportunity, you'll still be able to make these numbers work. I think we're going into this with high cost estimates and conservative income estimate, you know, so you're kind of going it both ways to say, is this feasible, even if it costs far more than it should, and we don't get the revenues that we want. And what this is saying is, yeah, it actually comes out.
So, and I'm very pleasantly surprised. I never thought, so this is absolutely worst case, as you said. So it's the worst debt financing, the highest, anyway, so low revenue expectations, high operating costs. So this is very, very.
Well, I've got to confess one other thing. When you're looking at these rate structures here, well, I did make these up out of whole cloth. As somebody who comes over here on the ferry on a regular basis, I certainly know what I pay to park before I get on that ferry. And that was one of the things I was testing this against to say, because a lot of your customer base is going to be making that cost comparison as well.
Okay.
So I'm paying $15 over there. Is it reasonable for me to pay $12 over on this side? They're probably going to feel like they're getting away with murder if they're paying 15 in Hyannis and they're only getting away at 12 over here on the island. So.
Okay. Any other questions?
I do think at some point, and I don't know that it has to be now, but it is worth an exercise, and I don't think it's Andy that can help us, is maybe Dawn might be able to help us, is what is the rental potential from the various spaces that exist. You know, Paula has at least one income stream right now from someone for tour buses. And I don't know that you have to be ready today, but as selectmen, you want to get comfortable with the economics, it's worth.
And what's Paula's rent every month? That's what I want to know.
Paula's rent a
Paula's
dollar.
rent every month.
That's right.
That's a whole nother, yeah.
That Greenhouse?
No. Just kidding.
Well,
Oh,
for,
and
for
here,
retail
yeah.
space, out of town is $40 a square foot is the going rate.
And
In town, it's
And you have at least one person renting from you now, what are they
100?
paying?
Yeah.
Per seat?
about 100.
Yeah, so you're looking at a tour bus company that's paying $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year. So if you have 3 of them there right now, which several use the public streets for free, and that will be an interesting policy discussion for the town.
They're not as big as that one.
No, but I'm just simply saying, it's an interesting set of
And
questions.
then you're looking at $100 rent retail.
So I don't think we've come up with any downsides. It's all upsides, right? I mean, we're the wrong group to, because we want this to happen. We're the wrong group to.
To somebody's point, I think Mike should just be given a minute before we jump off the money and finish, because he did his own analysis, and it's always refreshing to see numbers come out similar, Mike.
No, I mean,
Go ahead, yeah.
I didn't talk to Andy at all to get numbers ahead of this meeting, but I wanted to do my math.
You have something to share?
The gross income, mine is a little more. I had 2.7 million as annual income. He's got 2.1. Again, he's being hyper conservative.
Right.
I was being conservative, just one hyper. I'm not hyper-conservative. But, the debt on this, I mean, in our O&M, I had $500,000, he had like close to 600,000. Very close. The annual debt though, I'm assuming half of this would potentially be grant funded. So 10 million in grant and 10 million in financing. That's just a flat assumption. The interest rate, municipal projects are financed 1%, 2%, not the 4% that he's using. So my
Yeah, but
numbers-
he's assuming the
But we'll
Fed is
rely on
going up.
total
I
administration
don't
for
think
those numbers.
1% is.
I don't think we're getting them
accurate.
now. I think it's more in the high twos, wouldn't it be right now?
Right.
4.
So anyway,
Yeah, 1 to 2% is what I found some mass grant applications for that's not unprecedented. So adding that together, I mean, the annual debt on this was under $1 million. 2.7 was the generating, and then I had 1.8 is just flat parking revenue that could go into your benefit district.
okay, good. More upside. All right.
So,
this is at 250 spaces.
in terms of moving forward, we've established this base platform. We've got some design revisions we need to do, and then we need to start really working through the details of the finances. I will tell you, typically, at this point, you start to reduce the size of the group, and you start to, I don't know how to put this in a way that's not politically volatile, but you want to have these discussions behind closed doors. As long as you're talking about something that's concept, you definitely want to make the public aware once you reach a consensus as a group as to what you're proposing to do. But very rarely is it in your benefit to have those kinds of discussions out within the general public, because what you often run into is folks will pick the most provocative thing that they've heard and tend to run with that. And it will hurt your effort. It's one of the things that clipped us a little bit in Bar Harbor. We had one official at one point who had said just off the cuff, well, we could always do this as a GO bond. And that's what cost them the 4 votes when they went through on that process, because you had a couple of people that got up and said, we don't care what the financials say. They say they're doing this on a revenue bond. It's going to end up becoming a GO bond eventually. It's going to raise our taxes. So going forward, I'll leave it to Mr. Kelly to sort of figure out that path as the chair of this group, but we may want to downsize or think about doing things differently until we have a consensus going forward. As we're modeling this out, we can, clearly there's options for doing revisions on all of this, looking at alternatives. If we have multiple alternatives we need to evaluate, we usually do those in a matrix analysis. 30 to 45 days to turn this around and get this to that point. Once that's done, we maybe need another 30 to 15 days, or 15 to 30 days beyond that, in order to get it together as a report, come back, vet the draft with you, and then start moving this out into general public here. This is how I would drive this process as a professional based on prior experience. My closing question to you folks is, you're in the midst of negotiations here between the town and private parties. What do you need in order to make those negotiations move forward and keep this project moving forward? I know we thought we were going to be done with this back in April here, so we've actually gone beyond that threshold. And you may not be able to answer it right now, but if you come up with an answer in the next few days, let me know what you need in order to get this moving forward so that those negotiations can move forward in earnest while we're finishing up this work.
Did you want to cover the supplemental funding? We didn't have John's.
Yeah, we didn't
talk.
do
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
We didn't
It's
do
all right,
that.
Andy.
So, why don't we do that and then,
Well, I mean, supplemental funding.
yeah.
Andy's right, under our current administration, which is running like a fine Swiss watch, that's true, on the presidential and federal level, there's not a lot of dollars, there's not as many dollars in programs as there used to be. We probably see the grant monies coming for this would be probably more from the state. I think there's probably 2 opportunities here. MassWorks grant being one. MassWorks grant has been approved, new reports. MassWorks grant was for $5 million. And to give you a sense, they recently approved one actually in the city of Brockton for $10 million for parking. And these are both for 200 to 300 space parking garages. Didn't used to be able to get MassWorks grants for parking garages, but they changed that a few years ago. You do have to show that there's a benefit to the community for economic development and or housing. But I think there's an opportunity for those kinds of dollars. You can't get a MassWorks grant to pay for the whole thing, but Andy ran the numbers in the sense of with 0. So obviously for every $1 million, we'll adjust his debt service and to the good. And that's really a discussion on the state level with the governor's office with the Lieutenant Governor and with Jay Ash's office about making an application and making a pitch as to why this is an important thing for Nantucket for its long-term success as, you know, in tourism and economic development. And that's really probably the best piece to look at. The second piece to look at is to get something, you know, as they would say, put a bullet in one of the bond bills. Newburyport used that for some additional dollars with their legislative delegation. Got that put in the transportation bond bill, and that's just an effectively it's an old-fashioned earmark, where now that you have to look at your delegation to see to what extent they would be helpful and supportive. That is a highly political process. I just in this room, I would be a little bit concerned because of the age of your delegation, experience level. I'm being kind, that's a little bit of a concern, that they just don't have the juice that would be needed to get that. I think you're better off, I mean, not to say you wouldn't try it, but it might get knocked out a few times. And that would be something to at least consider in having that discussion. You will want your delegation to support your MassWorks application in any event, so they would be involved in the process. And I would probably suggest you why not try both. But I got to tell you the bullet I'm a little bit concerned about, just because who gets those are usually not effectively freshman legislators. But that's, don't please put that in the minutes.
John said they're babies.
You know, but I mean, those are probably on the state level, and certainly not unheard of to look for a $5 million MassWorks grant for a project like this. I mean, and you could run your numbers with, you know, making certain assumptions and level of, I mean, Andy just showed you the zero. You know, what's a $2.5 million grant? What's a $5 million grant? What's a, you know, you could run your numbers up to sort of see how does that impact your debt service going forward. So I think those are, now there are the transit authorities and you know, and Paul, you know this, there are some dollars available, you know, for intermodal. I gotta tell you, I don't think they're coming out of this administration. I'd love to say they are, but I'm not seeing it.
And there's some other implications that I think we need to be careful about. Yeah, and we're leaning more toward transit-oriented development. The intermodal money kind of went away a few years ago.
I mean, the T doesn't run under this area, so I don't think we're gonna have that. Yeah, it's a that's a tough call. So I would say a transportation bond bill and MassWorks would be the place I would go to get grant money, and it's grant money. So that's exactly the kind of money that you want. And one thing Jay Ash would say, I think if he was sitting here, is I want to be able to see a pro forma that this isn't a loser from day one. And that's a quote from him on Newburyport. He wanted to see a pro forma that showed how this could actually work. Break even. I mean, but so that it made sense for the community. And I think what Andy has shown you here today is, with highly conservative revenue numbers and fulsome numbers of debt, this work still at least breaks even, and you can make that case, which is something the state would want to see.
Is there a local match for these MassWorks grants?
They don't really talk about a match. It's really a project. You know, it's an infrastructure project, which did not used to include parking garage, and now does. So when we talked about when the hospital was going to be up in the water department, you know, area, we talked about a MassWorks grant in the $2.5 million range for that. That was related to, you know, promoting housing and development and the like. And that's not it's a pure grant money. And that's something that you would look at here. It has to be publicly owned. It has to be public infrastructure. It has to have tied to economic development and/or housing. That's sort of the criteria for it. So.
And the Nantucket factor, meaning more outreach.
Yeah.
This isn't the depressed community that's, at least as far as perception.
Yeah.
But what about the conditions of that land? Does that help us get money?
It can. One of the things that you write about is this, now it's not really a brownfield site, but it is a site of high contamination that has been cleaned. You can absolutely, and this land was, and this is the reuse.
All oil downtown.
Yeah, so there's absolutely a story to tell there. And now, whether there are other dollars available for the cleanup of the brownfields, I've looked at them over the years. The problem is the baggage that comes with that may not be something you want to.
Open up.
Yeah. Yeah. that's the only problem. But there are other dollars that are available for, and sometimes they're available for loan dollars, but I gotta tell you, I don't think that Nantucket's not gonna have the issue of, if it's a third-party developer, a private developer, there's certain loan dollars and interest rates available, but that's not really your thing, you're gonna get the lowest, borrowing rate.
Right.
Can I ask, John, do you think diff makes sense here?
Whether you use diff for the garage or diff for the other related public infrastructure, I certainly think diff is something to talk about here. The only downside with diff is somewhat because of Nantucket's low tax rate and the dollars that you generate. But certainly, I mean, you've got arguably 4 perimeter roads that have got to be rebuilt and that you don't fully own. Sure, we can get you 0 land damage agreements to get you the dirt, but then you got to rebuild those roads and you're going to have to run new, utilities and the like. So I think a diff does make sense. We'd have to run the numbers on that, whether the diff would make sense related to the parking garage. I don't know.
And we have bond counsel who's given us alternative, I don't know if you've heard her views on diffs. That's what her advice to the board is not to do a diff.
Yeah, she says go out and bond it just outright, right? Wasn't that her? I remember hearing and reading that. Yeah, I mean, that's.
I'm just saying, there's
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
I think one difference, at least in the project scope, is the one considered for Old South Road, which, as we know, didn't pass the voters' bond, which again is one of the downsides of that approach, is that I think there was a discussion about complication because it involves so many properties, where here there is a much smaller group of properties that it would involve. So I understand the bond council's advice on that, but
Yeah.
at least in an idea stage, which I think is where we are now, I don't think we should start foreclosing on things.
I think that, to add to Andrew on that, and Andy,
Yes.
sorry, I forgot your name for that for a second. What Andrew's talking about is, again, the voters. Okay, we don't just have town meeting, we have ballot. Okay, we won at the town meeting on Old South and lost at the ballot. The voters think they're paying for it.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sure you've looked at our tax structure, it's pretty amazing. I'm sorry, and Brian Turbot, if you talk to him, he'll explain it all in gory detail like your stuff. But it's pretty amazing how it works. What Andrew's saying is, if we could get the diff to work for this, it eliminates some of this potential problem. We go through this whole entire exercise and have it fail, like Nantucket Sewer, or something to that level. This is bigger than Nantucket Sewer. This is a big, huge thing that can't fail once it gets on paper. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not something we can just bring back in pieces like we can with Old South, or we can with sewer. And then we end up getting a great bid on the Shimo project, but no one knew that was gonna happen either, until it got approved. I mean, there's a lot of good things that could come out of this, it's just getting it to that step.
In most municipalities, when they're looking at doing something like this, and they don't want it to be self-supporting, they wanna offer free parking.
Yeah.
Or greatly reduced and subsidized parking, you usually do it as a diff-tiff.
Yeah.
Issue here. As a matter of fact, I think that's how Provincetown had done theirs at one time.
Provincetown's hurting for tourism issues. They came here a couple summers ago and wanted to be like us and figure out how to do it. But,
Well, it's just something to lay in
Yeah.
to the conversation. It adds more complexity and it'll take more time.
Actually, I take that back, Provincetown did it as a revenue bond. But one of the things they did is they said, if we start charging for parking, we're gonna take X amount of those proceeds and reinvest it back into the community as a benefit district. So that's how they kind of put sugar on that particular poison pill.
And so your experience in Bar Harbor, that was a general election, or was that a town meeting vote there,
It was town meeting.
town meeting there?
that was,
So obviously,
that's the question
you've
I
got,
had earlier.
I can sense
Yeah.
that there's levels of interest from the planning folks and the planning board, so we'll just have to see how that
Yeah,
gets sorted out in the political arena, I guess, so.
you know, and I honestly would say to you that looking at that is not such a bad idea. You want the perfect political dart. The higher the cost, the more likely someone's gonna throw that dart and use that against you.
Yeah.
So any kind of offsets I think you can bring to the table, or at least worth exploring. Try to say, okay, there are different mechanisms in place where we see that we can try to make tax structure a little bit easier on the public, so.
We also have to think about the Nantucket flip-flop factor in the social media. Like, we have one roundabout,
Okay.
10 years ago. Works great, now nobody wants them. Well,
Oh,
but
nobody wants them.
nobody wants them. Next
Nobody
week,
wants- Nobody
everybody's,
wanted that one.
but a
to
year
put
from
in,
now, that's correct.
You know?
In a year from now, his street, by the way, is now the shortcut to get to town because it works.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
And so we sort of get hot and cold here, and that's
Nobody
my
wanted Old
biggest
South
fear.
Road,
My biggest
but the
fear.
complaints to Libby
Yeah.
or to you, I mean,
It's,
are gonna just be
it's
horrible.
just, it could be changed, this could change tomorrow,
And saying,
okay?
I told you so.
But we have to sell this at, I'm hoping, at the fall town meeting in some fashion, because now the town meeting has become the public forum, because no one goes to these meetings to talk about these things and ends up on Facebook and blows up. We need to have town meeting be the mechanism to sell this. Unfortunately, I think public hearings have gone by the way of the newspaper. It's just the way things are now.
Well, just so you know, and I assume everybody knows, but the board last week voted not to put it on the town meeting for the fall, this project. So it's not going on.
And this
Okay.
goes back to my comments earlier, which is, you know, I've given you a foundation, we have a model to work with. All of these factors are now things that we need to start running
Yeah.
through that model. So that when we're finally ready to go to town meeting, we've thought about all of this and we are putting forth what we think is the most palatable concept.
So maybe that's a good time to segue. I know Libby's gonna make some comments in the interest of time about kind of where we go from here. So,
All I was really gonna do is sort of emphasize what Andy already said about the group. We're probably moving into a different phase now. This group specifically was set up to look at the intermodal transportation center itself and the design and the size and the kind of layout and all that. And now that we're getting into the financial aspect of things, I think we move into a different type of group, and it's either the negotiating group that we already have, with some financial people coming in every now and then, and if we need other people to come in, we can have them, like Andrew, we're meeting Andrew for some things, we might need Paula for something as well, but it's probably time that this group make, I don't know, some kind of a recommendation to the board, since it was a group established by the board. It sounds like earlier today we had that, in terms of the, conceptual size and
Right,
what we're
the
doing.
streets.
So
so that your thought that we do that?
that's my thought, yes.
Do you think that we need one more meeting with the changes in, I'm calling it, South Whale piece, and the elimination of the middle part of Old Whale Street, and some of the stuff that went back and forth about the width of steeple at the beginning? I mean, I'm just
I think
asking,
those are kind of
is that all
in
sort
the
of,
weeds things that we're gonna sort out?
that's gonna just happen by itself? So
Yeah.
we've already sort of decided that today.
Yeah,
pretty
I mean,
much.
we've got a finalized concept.
So I think
have-
it makes a lot of
I have to
sense
draw
what we
it
did
up,
today.
you know, and verify that it works, but I think
Yeah.
we've got a finalized concept.
Yeah.
We might actually, I was talking about, wanna have you come to an upcoming
I
board
know,
meeting
Okay.
to, with the group here.
Say that again, please. Yeah.
I was saying that we might wanna have Andy come to an upcoming board meeting with this group to make this recommendation of where we have landed really on the size and all, and then, mean, you could, I don't know, we wanna give a preliminary on the financial, maybe we would do that, just like you did here, or, I don't know.
I guess I'll throw this out there to kind of move things along, and so we can really get into the nitty-gritty with another group, whoever that is. I don't know who's gonna be on it, and the financing of the grants. For me personally, I would like to see this group, and I didn't think about specifically making a recommendation, but if everybody felt comfortable making a recommendation, going to the board, saying, you know, this is what we want, this is, you know, I would be, because we're just beginning the busy time, and I would, if everybody was comfortable, I would certainly be in favor of that myself.
Let me flip it a little and say, I think getting what we've completed to date out there for public discussion is a good thing, with a caveat, which is we regrettably, not trying to pull this group together again, probably do need one final meeting to make that final recommendation for one reason. I think we have to go back to the owners one last time, now that we have a final plan, and say, we're gonna present this publicly.
Okay.
Are you committed? Because frankly, one of the other questions I have, Jim, is to get updated on the board's thinking and the vote Wednesday night, because that was a pretty big surprise to the owners. And wanna kinda understand, be able to put that in context along with where we are.
So your thought was that you would go back to your owners and get some clarification?
Yeah,
I thought
take
you
this
said,
final
We need
vetting.
Andy, to put a very fine point on
Yeah.
it, we need Andy's plan,
Yeah.
informed by our discussions.
Right.
Understanding, and with some specificity, the amount of dirt that's involved,
Okay.
land and layout, to be sure that we can get support for it. And then
Okay.
with that, we then have to understand what the timing and the next steps are. Because we've gotta present both. I don't think we can present just a plan. It's gotta be, okay, and then how's it moving forward?
Right.
So you're saying we need another meeting, this group needs another meeting, or another group, or?
Well, I think we need Andy's plan at a
Okay.
minimum.
Okay.
That's informed by our discussions today, so we can have some, and then probably meet one, probably last time to get this group together,
Okay.
so that we at least know where we're headed. Because if our discussions don't go well, then we'll have to advise that too.
Okay, so that would happen before we meet again, your discussion.
Yeah, we'll do that
Andy's
before.
plan,
But we need Andy's
a
plan
couple of
sooner
us
rather
talk
than
about
later.
it, you go to the,
Yep.
and then come back with your.
Right, I think that's right.
Barry?
Yeah, there's one more thing I just want to throw into, we're getting close to rolling this out, okay,
Yeah.
within a meeting or two.
Yeah.
I'd probably strongly advise that we get someone too on our side who can start reviewing the social media network the moment we roll this thing out, because
I
that,
know.
and I think when we keep missing that opportunity at times,
Yeah.
we're just shooting ourselves in the foot, because no one's responding back,
Okay.
and the public itself is,
Yeah.
certain individuals in the public are just allowed to run rampant
Yeah.
with no checks in the system. So that's just something else I want to get out. I think that's just an important piece that we need to start really thinking about.
There's a lot of debate, I'm no expert on how people who wanna move things forward should deal with social media, but that's, maybe to have that conversation, I think is important. So, is that?
Well, I think
It sounds like we're gonna hear back from the owners
Andy-
group.
Andy does a plan, get the owners share it, and bring back the results to this group for a final meeting where we make a recommendation
I think so.
to the board.
There you go. Right, okay. As part of that though, the second question I was asking was, we need to understand this discussion about the fall town meeting, because for them, that was critical, for all of us.
Oh.
We had been going in that direction, so I want to understand what the board was thinking.
Well, I'm not sure, I guess the assumption about we were going in that direction, I'm not sure everybody thought we were, so.
Okay.
But, I mean, I'm trying to understand, I mean, that vote was taken, we can't do anything about it right now, and I don't know if we're gonna get any other thoughts from the board until the board sees what we're talking about.
Can I ask a question? What's the date for warrant, the final date for fall town meeting? I don't think that was
The
mentioned.
town meeting itself is October 10th.
No, oh no, Libby, I didn't mean that, I know, that's good, by the way, that's good for my
We don't
vacation.
have a timeline yet.
For the, I'm talking about the, to get something on the warrant,
Don't
for
have a
the,
timeline yet.
oh, there isn't a date, like a drop dead thing,
No,
like
I
we have?
haven't done the timeline yet.
Okay,
I'm going to be doing it probably for next week's agenda.
Okay.
Because I've been very, very busy lately in my office.
no, I'm just asking a question,
I'm just.
because fall is a long way away, and when we talk about town meeting, it's like tomorrow sometimes, it
Well, we
depends on what
basic-
the discussion
right.
is.
What we basically said was the warrant will have to be done by end of July, early August. The board talked about having a very minimal window to put in articles.
So something could change, Jim, then, I would assume after this, next cycle. Because of, like, as I said, I mean, gotta be able to have a discussion with the voters at some point, and the owners have to agree too, right, kind of a 50-50. So, okay. How we doing? I gotta go to work.
John, your thoughts?
I don't know how the decision not to move forward in the fall is gonna play.
How,
That's
play
not
with the owners?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, you know,
okay.
that was a really, because remember, we had a discussion that we were gonna have a spring town meeting to deal with a
Yeah.
piece of the zoning. We said we're gonna have a fall town meeting. I don't
Right.
want anybody to be surprised if our response, and we'll communicate it, is, we may not be moving forward. So that may be the response. Which would be unfortunate, but.
Yeah, understood. So, are we clear what we're gonna do? Andy, plan?
Yep.
Andy,
Talk to the owners?
That piece is very clear.
Okay. How
So when
quickly
you
do you
get that
think you
plan,
can
why
get the
don't you-
final,
That's important.
how quickly do you think you can get that back to us in final form?
Probably should be able to turn that around right after Memorial Day. That's about the earliest. I'm on the road kind of nonstop over the next week and a half.
Okay.
Sooner would be better.
If I can expedite it in any way, I will certainly do that. I know that there's a time crunch here. But I know that I can promise that and then promise to try and beat it.
So we would be talking about maybe a meeting by June first, about first week of June sometime.
Yes.
What I thought was this is going, we won't meet until after the owners have met, this group.
Right, but if we know that's going to come out the first week of June, then
Yeah.
we'll be setting up a meeting with the owners for that week.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
would like to start to think about a date right after that, so we're done with
yeah, this group.
this.
Yeah.
And when does the selectmen discussion happen? After that, or both?
As Libby said, this group reports to the board. So this group would go, Andy would come make a presentation to the board. This group would say, yes, this is.
After the owners?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
that, figured out, okay.
But by that time, we're public. I mean, we're public, so.
And before we show any SketchUp models, I think we'd like to, maybe, there's some things on the SketchUp model that we don't wanna show.
Yeah, that's.
So we'd like to have some input into that, I mean, even if it involved a preliminary discussion maybe with the chair of the HTC, just, there's some basics in the design that I think we wanna tweak before that SketchUp model starts.
Circulating.
Yeah.
And John, you had some, okay, so I think our last discussion about that was, we need to figure out the circulation stuff first. That was your comment before we go, we talked about going to the HTC last time.
Our
And you
involvement
said-
and having some
Yeah, involvement.
dialogue.
And
Well,
then-
what I meant related to that, but I think we've had the
But we've done
discussion
that
today.
today.
We've done that.
So
And
your
we'll get a
concerns
plan.
are
No,
laid.
I think getting some input, they may not like metal panel with concrete.
There's a few little.
I mean, it may be that they're not excited about that.
So
And
we
it's a-
should talk, we can talk offline about
Sure.
how to do that. I don't know if we need to have a group meeting to do that. We can talk about it.
Right, it could be staff level too,
Yeah,
it just,
right.
there's just some very basic,
Yeah.
and again, we're not detailing out
Right.
things, but the shape of some of the windows, some
So
of.
this is the political process that we're going into, the local political process.
Right. Because that could be what somebody latches onto, all
Yes.
those arches,
Right.
you know, and it's like,
Yeah.
it yet.
And this is something we need to resolve before we go before the
To the bo-
selectmen.
to the board of
Because
selectmen.
that's the concept we're gonna wanna put out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Everybody's gonna wanna see the pretty picture.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Anything else? I think we accomplished a fair amount today. Thank you for your time.
Yep.
Meeting's
Can I
adjourned.
get a copy of the?
Is there any public comment to come before us today? I should have asked. No? We're adjourned.